So in the paradigm of, so we're talking about sort of the basic attributes of consciousness, and how, like, the difference between intelligence and understanding, and how from a collection of things that aren't inherently intelligent, like let's say the building, any individual experience or any individual building block, or experience within consciousness doesn't have the properties of intelligence, but through the construction of something like a physical world, and essentially through construction of experiences that has been or can be interpreted or understood through narratives and beliefs that we're a body and there's a physical world, and of course there's different perspectives on that, but whatever perspective that you hold, it is consciousness that one is reflexively aware. So it's, I don't think it's correct to say that it's self-aware, but it's reflexively aware. So it is awareness. The same way a light in a dark room can illuminate all objects and make them be seen, but the light itself doesn't need another light to illuminate it, right? So it's like the fundamental property of illumination, of a knowing, of being, right? Like you know by being, I suppose, or the being knows. However, pure being, pure consciousness doesn't, right? Empty consciousness. You can kind of conceptualize that as just pure potential. Ego death, perhaps, or in a deep meditation, if there's no thoughts and you've sort of dissociated from experience, or in sensory deprivation, that kind of thing. There, in that space, in that empty space, there's no, like the perception of a self is by virtue of sort of like a subconscious or a less conscious conceptual structure of what is happening right now. Like your mind is consistently, without you being aware of it, essentially rendering the current situation that you're embedded in, right? It's like an autobiographic tape that you're constantly telling yourself, right? Like what is going on in the world. And there's so many aspects to that, time of day, actions of the last few days, the things you have to do today, conversations you've had, the way you woke up in the morning, decisions that you identified with. And there's constantly this autobiographic narrative playing out, which is by virtue of the narrative the reality that is lived. Okay, that was kind of a tangent, but now the question is, take the narrative away, or look through the narrative, and consciousness itself, like the pure experience data isn't just known, but there's some, or like experience, but there's something subtly different than just pure knowing or pure experience, which is understanding, right? And the act or the process of understanding is an experience of itself, but it's like a I don't know exactly in what way it's different, but like my pure qualia of a color of some object, let's say this, the knowing of it, right, is almost undoubtable, right? It just is what it is. And that's an experience. Now, also, my knowing, or the understanding, the experience of understanding, that this object is the object that it is, which is a lighter. That knowing as an experience, again, is just an experience. But it says something about, it's like a layer on top. It's, you know, it's almost like a higher ranking experience. It's like a more meta experience. And then I suppose things like responses to these meta experiences, to understandings, like subconscious ones, I guess, come in the form of emotions, right? Which are known first and foremost and can then be explained in terms of words, where then our explanatory, you know, the explanation for the emotion is now even more meta, right? It's like, you know what this means, and then you explain it, and then we have a new conceptual understanding of that experience based on the language that we used to express it. Yeah, and I'm guessing you could definitely go up and up on that hierarchy. But what seems pretty profound is that something that is inherently selfless or like what's profound to me right now is the property of interpretability, I guess. It's like just experience being there, fine. But to recognize rather than experience, to recognize, right? So I guess that's the thing, right? It's not just dots. It's not just dots of experiences, but there's also there's nodes and connections, right? It's the connections that link different experiences. So I guess understanding is not some elusive woo concept, right? Some like new thing that consciousness can do. I guess the two things that consciousness sort of does on like a subatomic level, if you will, where if you say that all of consciousness as some kind of field can have different like structures in it that emerge, whether you want to describe them as like different wave patterns that are stable or whatever, which might represent a certain experience of sight, or you know, and I guess you could sort of imagine your visual field as almost pixels, like dots of these different colors, different color experiences, and the way they are associated with one another is through connections. So they refer to one another, and maybe there's different kinds of references, but of course, like location, I guess, would be a kind of relation that gives you like a spatial sense of how things are related. And with sound, I think you have a similar thing. You know, there's again like a 3D landscape almost that you can perceive with your ears, and you also have a sense that this is one kind of sound, and of course it's not just one dot. It's got some temporal and spatial structure as well. But the kind of oscillation the kind of disturbance in the consciousness field that equals a sound to us versus that equals a sight would be a different one, right? It might be you know, like the different subatomic particles that just happen to have a different qualia. And then on your visual field as well, of course, you don't just see your visual field, you also see all of those colors and the shapes and stuff, they're invisibly connected by little relations to other concepts, other experiences. It's like when you look at a TV screen and there's a character there, you don't experience all the pixels, right? You don't just experience the pixels of different colors and different spots. You see a person. So it's almost like you don't see the visual. It's kind of an illusion that you see the visual field as it is, right? You get all the color information, or at least you get some color information. But most importantly is you get thinginess. There's so many things everywhere, right? You don't just perceive colors and shapes. You perceive stuff that has function and has connotations, has memories associated with it. It reminds you of things, might make you feel a certain way. So it's this like insane network of understanding that is connected to one another that we essentially mistake just pure reality for. And the same thing goes for the self, right? And the self is even weirder because with a thing, you can identify it, you can point to it, right? The self is not a thing that you can identify or point to. As a matter of experience, it doesn't exist except for as the sort of aggregate, and I don't mean illusion in a derogatory way at all, but it's like the aggregate illusion formed by the aggregate structure or illusion, or yeah, it is the aggregate structure that is formed by all sorts of beliefs we have about ourselves, and memories that typically would have formed these beliefs. And then of course, you might say your body, you might identify with the things around you, stuff in your, things you own, relationships you have. And all of this makes up this like nebulous construct of who you are. But the illusion that this forms, so that construct is real, but what is illusory is the sense that this construct actually has a center of experience. That there's sort of a center of experience behind my eyes, looking through my eyes at a physical world, and can sort of look backwards or into my head to investigate myself, the stuff that's in here. And yes, so that construct for what it is, with all its beliefs and so on, it gives the illusion of a center, a thinginess. It gives the illusion of thinginess to the self. And in a similar way to the outside world, we mistake that center, the thing that we are, that we have to take responsibility for, and this and that, and that we have all sorts of beliefs about how it actually is, that is actually what we are, or who we are, right? Truly. And when we recognize that this illusion, first we can break through the illusion, but just by trying to find it, right? If you can't find that center as a thing in comparison to how you define all other things that we can put attributes to, and that goes away, you just see the attributes, and you recognize that, oh shit, right? Now I believe I'm nothing more than a bunch of beliefs. And when you recognize where so many of these beliefs come from and what their implications are and stuff, because the nice thing is that once you're not a thing, right? Your consciousness and now, so it's not like a thing that has consciousness and it is a certain way, right? It is a certain physical way. We have this misstrued way of thinking about it because we have a physical world where things seem to definitely be a certain way. So once you recognize that you're not a thing that is a certain way, and you recognize that what you actually are is what's more fundamental, which is awareness, in which all experiences play out, in which awareness itself is doing this game of identification and construct building and forming beliefs and becoming more self-aware and whatever. And that what you now identify or what you see as yourself is this construct of beliefs that you formed. And from that space, you no longer operate with nearly as much fear, because you're not a thing that can be harmed, and you're not sort of, it's not you versus the world, because the world and you are both, or the world and the self are both in you. And from that place, you can start slowly opening up that belief structure, right? Because it's very contracted, right? Full of insecurities and reasons why we try to protect ourselves and why we're fearful about the future and regretful about the past, and we, like, again, because of this thinginess, we feel like we're a thing that's making decisions and we have to make the best decisions. We have to think really hard, and you know, it's a very contracted and anxious state, even if that might seem a bit bit like an over exaggeration for most people. I don't think it is. I think we can very easily get used to how discontent we actually are in most given moments, even though it doesn't have to be that way. Anyways, from that place, that self, because the only way we can still navigate the world as a self is through language. So it's not like once you recognize that you are consciousness, the self is just out there somewhere, right? Like you're still thinking as the self, right? You're still playing in character to understand this mystery of something that's outside of your character. However, the character can recognize what its role actually is, right? Because so much of this contraction anxiety comes from this fact that the self thought it was just it, and it had to fend for itself, and it was separate from the world. And it thought it was the master, right? Very egoic, and all sorts of negative consequences and emotions and suffering come out of that. But once the character can relinquish some control and relax, and recognize that it is actually more so a tool or a conduit for the greater reality to express itself through. And there's a certain way that you inherently are. But the issue comes in when we talk over it, right? Again, because of our perception of the self and the ways we think we are, we will control our future in line with what we think we should do. And more often than not, what we think we should do is embedded in some kind of fear response. But when you start relinquishing the control, right, when the thinking mind doesn't assume itself to be sort of the master that has to, you know, either in a fearful way or in a dictatorial way, try to control the future, then you can start listening to other aspects of your greater self, if you will, which are, emotions that you allow to appear without attachment and resistance to these. And you can also start listening to your intuition, which is a very weird one for your rational mind to accept, because it's a feeling, right? It's a feeling. It's like pure meaning. It just means what it means, and your rational mind your thinking mind can rack itself trying to either deny it if it's pretty clear what that intuition is implying experientially. It can try to deny it, or if it's quite unclear what the intuition is implying, it can rack its mind trying to understand it, right? Okay, it can understand it incorrectly. It can hold on too strongly to an explanation of what the intuition meant. But it's all about sort of trusting it, appreciating it, still acting with discernment, right? Like, it doesn't always, you don't always have to be perfect, right? But hearing into it and developing a kind of relationship with your intuition and the intuition as a kind of guiding arrow through the whole that you now recognize you're intimately connected with. And your ego has to go through some reconciliation, because your intuitions will very often, or sort of the opening up of your truer self and not suppressing certain parts of you because you've judged them to be bad, right? It was your judgment, your belief that has essentially put them into a negative light, but they're only negative because you've made that judgment, right? So slowly but surely you can relinquish that judgment, allow those parts of you to sort of come to the surface, and in that I think your intuition grows more strongly, and it can absolutely lead you in directions that you're very scared to go, because your ego has derived a lot of value or meaning to what it thinks you need, right? So yeah, so again, everyone's path is going to be completely unique, but there's it's it's very interesting, because it rings so true with so many religious and spiritual and philosophical teachings, but coming from a scientific background, it's been a real trouble with self-judgment and fear of judging others, and trying to find a way of talking about this stuff in as empirical terms as I can, and in a structured way, but man, like, there's so much beauty in a lot of the more spiritual or religious language and the metaphor, but yeah, it's pretty crazy, because I feel like the West, and especially the scientific community, has kind of damned this way of living, this way of thinking, this kind of perception as woo-woo, or like not good, not rational, not intelligent, disconnected from reality, almost like insecure, in need of fulfillment or something, right? So there's almost a way in which there's I know this because I was in that position, right? A kind of superiority, because I was like, oh yeah, cool story, bro, with all this, let's say woo-woo stuff, but I don't need that, I'm okay with being just a cosmic accident, and I don't think, I think you can be, right? I think I was not as content and fulfilled as I am now, but I was not suffering because of it, right? I was in awe of the universe as it was. However, there were things, on this journey that led me to this point, which didn't quite make sense to me, right? So like the hard problem of consciousness didn't make much sense, and yeah, I just wanted to understand the universe, and it brought me to this point, and it's bizarre, because I know it's true, and it's and that can come off as like I'm fearful of that being seen as, and I know it will be seen as, what's the word, arrogant or cocky or like delusional. But it's different to anything else I've ever known. So it's not you know, we can talk about the conceptual stuff all day. And of course the whole world is full of different conceptual stories about things that people believe and this and that. But there is this primordial truth. I think it's, I forgot what the other term was for it, but it's this primordial truth of consciousness. It is this truth that can be recognized empirically, right? Just by introspection and looking through these beliefs that inform how we interpret reality. And from that standpoint, you can start observing certain qualities of consciousness. And this is what this is what all religions and every, you know, everyone that talks about this kind of stuff points to. And it's fulfilling, it's beautifully confusing, it's beautifully intimate. It's fucking hard, right? Because inevitably you're gonna have to change your mind in quite a substantial way. But I would say it's the kind of confusion, the kind of difficulty that you don't fear, but you learn to appreciate, right? And you recognize that that's really what it's about. It's really about seeking out the best teachers, whether they're in fear or whatever else. And yeah, that'll be it. Ciao, ciao, bye.